So, hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dawn. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm zooming in from where I am born and raised in Jajaki territory, colonially known as Montreal. I'm excited to share space with you. Some of you were with me the last time. I think it was maybe end of March, beginning of April, where a pigeon flew in to the space I was teaching from, and it was present, I kid you not, from the moment we started, and then when I closed the Zoom and then I was ready for my pigeon kind of hunt to send it out the window, the pigeon had flown out as soon as our Zoom was done. So all beings want access to these teachings. All beings are worthy, and it's a both and. All the windows are closed. So I think we're safe for today. And so what we'll do together, we will do some chanting. We'll chant some refuges and homage to the Buddha. We'll do some meditation, and then in the second half of this hour, I'll share some thoughts on teaching or on the teachings. And then the last 20 minutes are optional for anyone who wants to hang back and chat, ask questions, share things that might be coming up in regards to their practice, their life, whatever that might be. And so once more, the chant book is in the chat, pardon. And so we'll be chanting on page 3. It is the Namo Tassa at the top of the page, as well as the Buddham Saranam Gacchami that's right after. And then following that, we will chant on page 4, the recollection of the triple jewel. Pardon. The invitation, so knowing that we'll chant and then we'll be in meditation, what I'll also do is leave time between each chant, just so that we can notice how our body is receiving the words, the vibrations, the sounds of our chants this morning. It might be different from the last time you chanted. So just allowing room to be surprised for what might be present. And then after that, as I mentioned, we'll flow right into a meditation that I'll partially guide, basically. So yeah, thank you everyone for spending your time with me doing this, and just for your practice and the merits that we're cultivating with our practice. So with that said, we will start with the Namo Tassa chant on the top of page 3. Okay, so I just double checked. Everyone is muted, so feel free to chant out loud in your own space. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. And the chant directly below. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. And then turning to page 4, the recollection of the triple jewel. Iti so bhagava araham sama sambuddho vijacharana sampano sugato lokavidu anutaro purisa dhammasaratisa tadeva manu sanam buddho bhagavati sawa kato bhagavata dhammo sanditiko wakaliko ehipasiko opanaiko pachatam veditabo vinyuhiti supatipano bhagavato sawaka sangho ujipatipano bhagavato sawaka sangho naya patipano bhagavato sawaka sangho samichi patipano bhagavato sawaka sangho yaditam chatari purisa yuganiya tapurisa pugalam esa bhagavato sawaka sangho ahunayo pahunayo dakinayo anjali karaniyo anutaram punyaketam lokasati. Now gliding in or sliding into our practice, our formal practice. In these first few moments, pay particular attention to how the act of chanting has swirled energy, and how with each moment of settling here in our formal practice, how that energy slowly slows down, gets more spacious. Invite the body, the mind, the heart to relax. You might use words like, may this body relax. May my mind relax. Or it can be even a body scan. You release the parts of the body that are tense, holding on. And integrate, if you haven't done so already, whatever way of practice that might be the most supportive for how you're showing up in this moment might be. So if in these first few moments of quiet and settling, you're noticing, I don't know, there's a sadness or a heaviness, you might choose to practice loving kindness, metta, or karuna, compassion. For others, if the mind feels busy or agitated, you could cultivate gathering the heart and mind around one anchor, an anchor that's either neutral or pleasant, like the breath or sound. Or an option for those who might be feeling settled and calm is to practice with an open awareness, not resting on one anchor, but being really curious what attracts your attention and allowing mindfulness to accompany the mind to that phenomena. And then the next phenomena, and on and on. At any point, if what is arising feels intense, hard to be with, you can open your eyes, have the gaze set downward as a way to create a little bit more spaciousness in the heart and mind. In addition to whatever way you're practicing right now, become aware of how you're practicing. What is the tone, the attitude with which you're practicing? For example, we could be reciting metta phrases, and yet there could be a firm grasping, this deep want. May I be happy, as opposed to maybe one that is more open and kind, accepting, embracing of how things are in this moment. If you're practicing with an anchor, it might be more when you notice that the mind has wandered, that the how you're practicing becomes clear. For example, if you bring your attention back to your anchor in a way that feels maybe like a yank, you're yanking or pulling, judging, you're doing so harshly, like mind, come on, do not wander, get back to the breath. Notice that attitude. It's very possible that's not happening for you, in which case, cause for celebration. The point here is, let's also become aware of how we're practicing, so that in addition to cultivating qualities of practice, it can be integrated or done so at different layers or levels. Need be, invite the body, mind, and heart to relax again. It's a way to allow your true essence, one that is aware, to rise to the surface more easily, effortlessly. There are just a couple minutes left in our practice. If you want to end with reciting loving kindness, if you haven't been doing so, if you've been focused on an anchor, you may open up your awareness. So you might shift how you're practicing, or you may recommit to your practice in these final minutes, as well as a bell will ring. And so if you need to adjust your device for volume, please do so. Welcome back. And so feel free to stretch, scratch, shift your posture, whatever you need, to help you feel a little bit more settled in your body so that you can receive as much or as little teachings as I'll share soon. So I think if I'm to sum up what I'd like to share about today, it could be about wise view, but then I feel like you might have heard this already, this description of the practice being likened to a hologram, where even though we might be looking at one part of the practice, all these other parts come forward as well. And so it's like I'll be talking about wise view and a bunch of other things probably too, most likely. There are many things that I love about these teachings, one of which is that even though these teachings come from 2,600 years ago, they are just as applicable today, which makes them feel timeless or as if like there's no separation in time, basically. And even though, at least for me, the doorway into the practice has been suffering, and it is for a lot of people, suffering is what gets us here. Our first exposure of cultivating the qualities of practice is usually through mindfulness. And some folks might be here more from, say, your doorway in was, through some sort of suffering, but through maybe the more secular world. So still mindfulness. As I mentioned, I live in Montreal, and Montreal is a French and English city. And so when we translate mindfulness, it's often pleine conscience, which is a direct translation. And I think it can be translated back to English as like a full awareness. However, I do like this, this translation better. And this was one of my teachers, Pascal Auclair, who said it like so. And he said it, vision claire, clear seeing. And so I really like that. And because this practice for me has certainly helped me to see things a little bit more clearly, to step out of thoughts and opinions and into the body and into what is real right now, and to touch into some of the universal truths that we can find in the teachings. But when or in addition to that, when I think of clear seeing, I think it speaks directly to wise view as well, and how wise view can inform does inform every aspect of our lives, from our thoughts, our words, our actions. Every part of it is shaped by how we view it. And in this part, when we think of wise, samma, S-A-M-M-A, is the Pali word that we translate. Sometimes in the teachings, the English version of the teachings, it's right. Although for me, that brings up a lot of like right, wrong. And so I prefer using wise. And so in this case, we're really talking to wisdom and not intellect. And so I just want to make that distinction as well, where we might, for example, when I said, I'm going to talk about wise view, I don't know if this arose for some of you, but it could have easily been like, well, I know all about wise view or something like that, and so that points to this intellect, this, not a disembodied knowing, but more like a brain knowing is how I see it. And so that is different from wisdom, because, for example, people can know a lot of things, but still lack the wisdom that can lead to freedom from suffering. And that's what we're really trying to get to. And for me in my practice, there was certainly a time where I was caught in reading a lot about the practice, but not practicing the practice. And so I was cultivating intellect and not the wisdom. And for me, the wisdom comes through the body or the direct experience of the practices. But in regards to wise view, it starts the moment we're born. Even, I don't know if anyone has thought about when does wise view or when does view start getting cultivated. I didn't really consider it until I read this book that was part of this program that I did through Spirit Rock about 10 years ago, the Dedicated Practitioners Program. And the book that we were assigned to read was called Culture as Comfort. And it was written by a cultural anthropologist, Sarah Mahler, Mahler. And so in regards to how our view starts the moment we're born, this is the quote that made me think of it. As babies and toddlers, we rapidly learn that human life, through complex and certainly though complex and certainly variable from person to person, is highly patterned. Children pick up these patterns so fast that they only have to understand it subconsciously as are. They have to learn so many things quickly to be able to behave and think according to the people around them. Otherwise, they would be frightened most of the time. And so I thought that was just news to me and completely wild that that babies, and of course it makes sense when I take a step back, but babies are born into such complex social worlds that they know nothing about, that they have to learn a lot of basic skills pretty quickly. And one of the ways is through this patterning that happens in the brain, or in the brain. And a few months ago, when I think of this quote or this excerpt, I think of a lot of my friends who are raising babies right now. And a few months ago, I had gone to see some friends in the UK. And my friend, the mother of the child, she was particularly concerned that all of the caregivers that were around her two children looked the same. And they were family, but she really wanted people of different ages and races and genders to be around the baby. And I don't think she knew of this patterning. I think she just recognized that in some way, if the babies are always seeing the same type of caregiver, then eventually what gets kind of formed is that certain types of people are safe and others are simply unknown and or unsafe. And so basically, from birth, we're developing this sense of self and then reactivity. And I wanted to point this out because when I started really looking at some of my views, and I was certainly appalled at some of the thoughts that would come up in my mind, and I would then go on this like hunt in my mind of like, that does not feel like me. That is not in line with my values. So where did I get that thought from? And I was just like, not necessarily obsessed, but I was spending more time than is useful thinking like, did I ever hear my dad talk like that? How about my mom? Was it from this person or that person? And it's like, yes and no, it could have been from anywhere basically. And so that's why I just wanted to, if anyone, just to save yourself months or a year, to not bother going down that hole, that rabbit hole. And then, since I'm talking about babies, well, then as children, what also happens, and this has certainly been true for me, is that we start to cultivate these strategies based on input from our family and through culture and society, and even through movies. So some of my strategies growing up were around like how to get attention, which was really a way for me to feel as if I was worthy of love. I'm the third born, 2 older brothers. And one of my friends who also has 3 children, another friend was asking, like, what's the difference between raising, the first 2, or how is it different, the first one from the second, from the third? And my friend said, oh, the third one basically raises herself. And I feel like that was very much how my childhood was. And then as a result, my parents were just kind of like, oh, she'll be fine. And even to this day, actually, they don't really check up on me a lot because I usually am fine, thankfully. However, I think it comes from, that third child raises herself sort of mentality. And so some of my childhood strategies are based around how to get their attention and whatnot. And then other children, I didn't really watch Disney movies growing up, but I can just imagine the Disney movies, they're changing now a little bit, but when I was growing up, it was just like subconsciously learning who gets to kiss who, the types of bodies of the evil people, the types of bodies and skin color of the good people, those who were the center of the story, those in support roles, et cetera, et cetera. And so kind of internalizing these views again. And I would classify that as unwise view, but it was unintentional, of course. And then if I think of my teen years, I thought about this the other day, partly because my partner had someone coming over to our apartment. And I remember, tidying up, but then I also have this room spray, simple water, essential oil, and I was spraying it all over the house. And then I remember how when I was a teen, I would never have people come over because I was so afraid that they would say your house smelled funny or your house smelled like food, because we were always like frying something or whatever. And so when I was spraying the house, I can trace it back to that. And I can't recall if someone actually made a comment, basically. But again, unwise view that turned into the strategy that shows up decades later, 30 years plus later. So, and so all this to say is that view, as I said, gets cultivated, and this sense of self and sense of reactivity from the moment we're born. And this practice helps us to start seeing these views a lot more clearly, so that we can choose how to respond. Is this still true? Is not even still true. Is this true? Do I still have to buy into it? And some of the things, like when I sprayed the house, it smelled nice. And I thought, well, I'm going to spray this more often. So even though the root of it might be unwise, it's like, I'm still choosing it. Outwardly, it's still the same thing. However, the root of it has changed. So just letting you know that still things can still look the same, but underneath it, that other layer. So in our meditation, I invited you to tune into how you're practicing. So peeling back one layer. So it's a little bit like that. And so just also noting that just as our personal intentions, or the spraying of the room, for example, for me, this personal intention can have an impact. Well, this can also happen on a collective level. So for example, collective could be communities, the communities we affiliate with or affiliate in, or the ones that we feel comfortable in, or that we grew up in, also have collective intentions. And then and then those can become cultural norms and values. And so it's also, I think, really important for us to pay attention, not just to how actions come to fruition in thoughts and words. Sorry, how our thoughts can come into fruition in thoughts and actions later on, individually, but also on a collective level. Some of you know I'm on the board for Sacred Mountain Sangha, and I'm on other committees or have other leadership roles in different organizations. And the one of the things I hear, not so often, but when I do hear it, it's like all the hairs rise up. And it's like, well, this is how it's always been done. That really fires me up like instantly, because it's like, just because that's how it's always been done doesn't mean that it's wise or that it serves the collective. Who benefits, basically, because basically from cultural norms and values, these come through in the world. And so I often think about, say, for example, if there's certain communities that kind of stay somewhat in like a bubble, but then that bubble might have more power than other communities, then that homogeneous type of folks then start going into roles that have a lot of power, where they start creating laws. And then suddenly the laws that are created for that echelon of norms and values do not represent the norms and values that come from a person like me, who doesn't look like them, who wasn't ever part of their bubble, for example. For one example is just when people who don't look like me, share similar life circumstances, who aren't even the same gender as me, are suddenly in charge of making rules and laws and decisions that impact my body or how I can use my body. That's one example, a big one, but yeah. And so basically we start navigating how we are seeing the world and how the world sees us. And in that way, we can't rest on we are all one. So it's like that's the absolute truth. And so it's again like this both and. It's like we are all one and we are different. And this comes from Sebene Selassie, her book, You Belong. Although we are not one, we are not separate. And although we are not separate, we are not the same. So pointing to the same. And then the Buddha, he teaches that there's one defilement which gives rise to all the others, one root which holds them all in place. And that is avidya, ignorance. And I use delusion, ignorance interchangeably, just so you know. And so in some ways, it's like, yes, there's only one root, as opposed to trying to put out a whole bunch of fires. It's like, great, I could put a lot of my attention toward one. And because it's one main root, it is deeply rooted. So just, again, to keep us in check. It's like, there's one, great, let's keep on this work. It's worth it. And it is a lifelong practice. And so delusion, some of you might know it. It's part of the 3 poisons along with grasping. And of course, I'm blanking on the other one right now. And aversion. Thank you. Thank you, mind or awareness, for returning in this moment. Delusion, it clouds the mind and it really gets in the way of us seeing the true nature of things. For example, it convinces us that there's some sort of happiness and stability and permanence, that we have this unchanging eternal essence that is me, myself, and I, as opposed to our natural essence is one that is aware, that is boundlessly loving and kind. So delusion gets in the way of us seeing that. And in regards to the permanence, I remember seeing something that said that we also define success in regards to permanence. I have a few friends who are divorced, for example, and they talk about how they felt like such a failure in culturally and on a societal level as for having a failed marriage. And it's like somehow that success means following through with that book you set out to do, keeping that same job, staying in that relationship, staying in that house that you built, even though it no longer suits your needs, etc. And that's not true. Things change, big and small, of course. Delusion holds us to navigating the world in a way that's actually not really helpful or onward leading to less suffering for ourselves and others, because it encourages like either or thinking, us or them thinking. I think also delusion dehumanizes because of that, it buys into separation. Delusion also removes the possibility of nuance and complexity. This both and that I've already been pointing to, it removes that. It's again that either or. It also tells us this is how it's supposed to be. Something similar to this is how it's always been done, in a way. In the Visuddhimagga, which is a thick book, it's called The Path of Purification. And it's a commentary on the Buddhist teachings written, gosh, I don't know, centuries ago, certainly, but I can't recall the year, but a few hundred years after the Buddha passed. And in the Visuddhimagga, it says that delusion doesn't penetrate reality. It fosters an unwise attention and causes unwise action. And Joanna Hardy, another teacher, a teacher at Spirit Rock based in LA, she says that delusion is the ridgepole that holds up the rafters of anger, clinging, fear, and sorrow. And so when I think of, to tie in some of the things I've talked about already view, intention, impact, delusion. I thought about how, for example, girls, the unwise view that girls don't deserve an education. And that is the view in some places in this world. And that there are, I think, 129 million girls worldwide. And it's, and I forget how many of those girls have access to even primary school education. But imagine if 129 million people were prohibited from education and the impact of that. And there was a study at a university here in Montreal, McGill, that was done that it studied 125 countries, and it found that the death toll caused by floods, droughts, wildfires, extreme temperature events, and extreme weather events could be 60% lower by 2050 if 70% of women were able to achieve a lower secondary school education. And so it's just like the impact basically caused by unwise view, caused by certain, like maybe a homogeneous mindset in power. When I went to the UK a few months ago, I did this Black History Walk in London, and that it showed all of just the history, but from a different point of view, basically, some English history. And that in the tour that I did, it talked about, or he showed us pictures about how there was a documentation of Black and brown people in all ranks of society. I think this was like in the 12th century or so, and that they held, and there's paintings and pictures documenting this. And yet the idea of race as we know it today started in the 17th century after slavery began. And there's this article, Britannica article called The History of the Idea of Race that talks about this. And so again, it's like race, even though it penetrates so much of the oppressive systems and so much harm in our societies, it's fairly new. And so it's, again, unwise view, intention and impact, and how long-term it could be. Also just views around what is inherently, in quotes, male or female in regards to the body has led to countless harm and death in the 2S LGBTQIA community. And then, there's so much that we can touch on in regards to how unwise view has an impact. I think of as well, maybe the last thing I'll say, but one thing I think of is in September. I know we're a few months away, and like those of you who have children or who are in school, you're winding down or you have finished the school year, and so you may not be thinking at all of the new school year, but I often think about that when it's like August or September, and how in Canada, and I think in the US, but certainly in Canada, we had residential schools for our Indigenous populations. The last one closed in 1996 or something like that. That is just, yeah, yeah, I'm embarrassed basically by that, but how I think of, any transgenerational trauma. I wonder how our Indigenous communities feel when August and September roll around, and there's maybe a buzz in stores. Like if I think of walking into any stores around that time, there's a lot of back to school messaging. But what trauma was passed down when that meant, as little as a few decades ago, being taken from your family and being wiped of your culture. And so again, unwise view has an impact that could be long running. The Buddha says there's no single factor so responsible for the suffering of living beings as wrong view, and no factor so potent in promoting the good of living beings as right view. Larry Yang, another dear teacher. Breaking together with conflict is the process by which we create peace. When we break together and live relationally with conflict, resolved or not, we create peace. We must continually call ourselves back to our higher aspiration of breaking together in order to transform our world together. And so some folks, I put that in because some folks, we might be in this practice because we got here through the doorway of suffering and we want peace. And so then to do this hard work of, in a way, this bodhisattva vow, to practice for the benefit of all beings, for me, that would mean no one left out, all populations included. And it's hard work. So, and yet it is possible to break together. I love that, breaking together in order to transform our world together. And so delusion is a lack of information in some ways. And so this is, again, where mindfulness, our practice can come in. It helps us move toward, get curious, not with an agenda, which is the definition of mindfulness. And then when we get to practice in Sangha or in community, well, then Sangha holds us accountable. It calls us in. It is not, for those of you who are not in this for the bodhisattvic vow, what can happen is that it becomes navel gazing. We might become passive. But in the Satipatthana Sutta, the teachings on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, there is, and the Buddha repeats this 16 times in that sutta, but that our practice is done internally, externally, and internally and externally. So it's this direct invitation in the relational field. I think also we can see this invitation to be in the relational field, to do this work together in the world in a lot of the teachings of the Buddha. For example, also in the Eightfold Path, there's wise action, wise speech, wise livelihood. And so all of this happens simultaneously. When we're able to bring our inner and outer practice together, it invites us to be mindful of the impacts as well, both on individuals as well as groups. And so it's thanks to this practice, we have this opportunity to increase our awareness, which then increases our learning, which then feeds back into the sort of world that we are creating or co-creating, one that can lead to less suffering. And that, I think, perhaps, it's clear by now if it that there's this direct connection between taking care of our inner life and the taking care of our outer life. That, again, much like the teachings, it's a hologram. We cannot have one without the other. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for just allowing whatever words that feel like they're sticky to let them stick to the heart and mind, and whichever ones that, may not have resonated or that have slipped away, let them slide away. Trust that whatever is resting on your heart is enough. Yeah, thank you. All beings, birds, although there's birds in another one, in someone else's rectangle on Zoom, not in mine. No pigeons today, but birds, all beings, 4-legged, 2-legged, multi-legged. May all beings benefit from the merit of our practice. Yeah.